You're listening to Pixelated Audio, episode 197, Astyanax.
Welcome to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focusing on game audio, its history, and the people behind it. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is Gene.
Hey, everybody. Today we're going to be listening to music from one of my favorite games growing up, Astyanax. We're going to be focusing on the NES version, but we're going to dip into the arcade version, which actually came out a little bit earlier. But that we'll talk about why we're playing less of that and more of the NES one as this goes on. It's a little bit of a harsh soundtrack, that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you picked this. I played this game and, many years ago. I haven't really played it since.
Same, yeah.
I did not fall in love with it like a lot of other games, but that's not saying it's not a good game, right?
Yeah.
It is fun. It's a little basic, but yeah, it's enjoyable.
It's a solid, 6.5, 7 out of 10 kind of game. It's trending downwards, but it's still fine. It's fun. But I especially like this soundtrack because it's got, I don't know, there's a certain kind of quality to it that I feel like, the NES is somewhat limited in its sound capabilities, but there's like a frantic energy that kind of goes throughout this entire NES soundtrack, which I really liked growing up.
I think the soundtrack is actually really basic in terms of composition, or maybe not just composition, but the usage of the channels.
That's true.
But there's something also kind of enduring about this simplicity of it. It reminds me of a lot of early MSX stuff, or even, I don't know, Master System kind of sounds, and it's not really using the full capabilities of the NES in a lot of ways, but it also is charming in its own way. So
that's true. Yeah. And we'll get into that. That's actually an interesting point, because I think while the sound design is maybe a little bit on the basic side, I think there's kind of an odd, I don't know, I'm going to call it haphazard, but I don't mean that in a bad way, but the composition is very chaotic, which you don't hear this kind of composition, and it makes sense because it's this composer's first game, as far as I can tell. But Astyanax was known in Japan originally as Lord of King, and was an arcade game released in 1989 by the company Aicom and published by Jaleco. Those purveyors of quality, as I love to say on HG 101. Jaleco's an interesting company. They're like the king of knockoff games, pretty good clones of something that you played by a Konami or a Sega or something. The original arcade game was pretty successful, at least for the time. I looked this up. It was on its Wikipedia. In the trade publication Game Machine in Japan, it listed Astyanax on their January 1990 issue as being the 20th most successful arcade unit of the month. I don't know how successful 20th is, but at least it made some kind of list. The NES version, I think, was more successful than that, because I remember seeing it in every rental shop. In fact, I'm pretty sure that way I experienced it for the first time was as a rental, and then I liked it enough to buy it for $5 or $10 off of a friend. I think is how that story went. It's been so long, I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, I don't even remember who owned this on my block. I don't think it was Dusty. It was somebody else, but I remember playing it.
It was just like kind of around.
Yeah, it was just it just made its way around. Yeah.
What's interesting about the game? Like, I guess a number of games from the era. The NES version took some creative liberties, kind of like Bionic Commando. So they added a lot more story. They changed some of the level design, some of the mechanics. So it's kind of like an original game based on the arcade rather than like trying to be a direct one-to-one port. But it feels very different to the arcade game, but spiritually, like I was actually playing a little bit of it. There is a lot of similarity, but, obviously less enemies on screen, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the story is actually quite long. There's not a lot of text. It's just really slow.
It is.
But there is a lot of dialogue and stuff, and that wouldn't really work in the arcade. I mean, you put in money, you want to play your game, so I think with the NES, they took that liberty. Yeah.
Well, let's play a little bit more music. Let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah. We have Introduction, I think, up next. So let's take a listen. We'll be right back.
So that was the introduction. That plays pretty much when you hit start, and some text scroll, and it's talking about your character. I think at this point it's talking about the princess has already been kidnapped, and the evil Dark Lord, I forget what his name was.
It's Blackhorn.
Blackhorn, yes. He's very purple in the NES because that was the darkest color they had available.
Oh, that's right.
Worked, yeah. But yeah, he's sort of like talking about how bring him to me. I'm sure that's how he would have sounded if he had been voiced, that kind of thing. But it's cool because it introduces a lot of different rhythmic variety. It's sort of like a triple time, then sort of a faster duple time, then sort of like a half time.
Yeah, the dun dun dun. Yeah,
yeah, and then it's lots of arpeggios and stuff like that. So I think it does a pretty good job, sort of like that intro track that we heard, of setting up, or rather the prologue and title screen track of setting up this, like, it's kind of this epic fantasy. And there's sort of urgency to it. So I really like that.
It fits the bill.
It does, yeah.
We have another track here. This is level 1, the Remlia Castle track. Let's take a listen. All right, that was level 1, Remlia Castle, and I'm just realizing this is the first time I've said that out loud in my life.
Remlia?
Like, most of the stuff in this game, I've never said out loud.
Yeah, I was just talking with Brian before the show that, like, if somebody pronounces Astyanax, whatever. Like, I read a lot of books as a kid, and I definitely had a lot of words for many years that people laughed at me when I said them out loud because I had never heard them said out loud.
Oh, yeah. I have plenty of those, too.
And this game is full of this, yeah.
Astyanax.
I'm not saying that's correct. That's just how I pronounce it.
No, I mean, again, until I had said it out loud to you, I don't know if I've ever said it out loud.
Probably not.
As a kid, maybe, and I probably made it sound ridiculous then. Astyanax. How did I say it before?
Astyanax. I've heard it pronounced that way too. I think it's fine. I prefer Astyanax.
I think Astyanax is correct, though.
Because your character has an axe weapon, you know? It feels more powerful that way.
Well, it's from the Greek mythology, right? Like, it has nothing to do with...
Nothing,
well,
yeah.
Okay. Anyways, Remlia Castle.
What were you saying about the baseline in this one? When we took the break, you mentioned something.
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Let me listen to that real quick. Yeah, so we were talking about, like, during the track break, we were talking about it was really hard to make out that triangle because the other notes pop so much, like, you can't really tell if it's doing this repetitive, like, da 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 da, and then octave, or if it's sustaining that note the entire time. And we just heard it. I mean, it's sustaining it, but, like, the octave is on, like, a different beat, and then all of a sudden they'll have that rise that you heard where it is clearly like staccato like notes, right? But it comes off as strange because the other notes take the melody and harmony takes so much precedence that you really can't tell. Like, you can hear the notes, but you can't tell the rhythm of it. And I think that's why, because it matches the melody so well.
That goes to something that you set up at the top of the show, which is this was the composer Toshiko Tasaki's first game soundtrack. We talked about her on the Persona episode, but I think what's interesting is I think we tend to, maybe not on the show, but in general in the VGM world, we tend to highlight people at the top of their game. They've had some work under their belt, but it's also interesting to see what somebody is like when they're just kind of figuring out the tools, right? Like, there is a certain kind of charm to unrefined sound choices. Like, imagine if this were the third or fourth game, you know, that'd be better sound patches. And
well, they would have been working on for years at that point, you know?
Right.
And upgrading their style and game and whatever, you know?
And I don't say that to be like mean or anything, but like, I do think it's interesting, like, to look at somebody when they're at a certain point in their creative, you know, journey, not as a way to judge, but like, it still has cool aspects about it, even if it's a little bit simple.
I think this relates to a lot of things, right? Because I'm not a football guy, but I know that there's a lot of people really into college football.
Oh yeah.
Even over like the NFL, because, you know, the players are young. They're just figuring out, there's more mistakes. There's more, you know, it's a different kind of energy. And then when you get to like the professional level, it's, you know, it's a lot more, you know, by the book, and, you know, things are, you know what
I get it. Yeah. There's a certain kind of like formality to it, or structure, or like, in order to play at that level, you have to abide by the quote unquote rules.
Right.
Not literally the rules of the game, but like, you know, if you don't want to get tackled, you have ways to avoid it. But sometimes you see people do really odd things to see if it works, you know?
This happens in everything. I associate with sports, but I could have said
all
the
creative
same thing for
pursuits.
like Metallica, for example. Their early albums, like, compare them to now, right? You know, they're just very different. So anyways, Toshiko Tasaki, did you want to mention anything else?
Yeah. So I mentioned, we talked about her a little bit in our podcast, the live podcast at MagWest. She's worked most notably on the Persona games. Started off with this game, Astyanax, then worked on the Mafat Conspiracy, one of those Golgo 13 games for NES, Whip Rush for Genesis, I'm going to have to ask you to pronounce this one, Brian, because I don't know the Japanese name here.
Butobi Turbo Daiboken.
I guess it wasn't as hard as I
you
thought.
write it, but you wrote it in English. Whenever I have to read Japanese in English, it's always so much harder.
That's an interesting one because that one was like reskinned for America as Decap Attack, and it has a much darker, like Genesis-y kind of soundtrack. This one's a lot more upbeat.
Decap Attack is awesome.
Oh no, Decap Attack is great as a game, but the original game is like very anime, colorful. It's like, yay, you know, like bright blue skies, cutesy and very upbeat soundtrack. She did the conversion of Kadash for Genesis, which actually isn't a bad conversion. Then some of the earlier Persona games, kind of towards the 90s, Devil Summoner, Soul Hackers, Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, and Innocent Sin, and Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. More recently, she's also worked on the Akiba's Trip and Akiba's Beat games, as well as Octopath Traveler 1 and 2, which are very recent. Mm-hmm. And I think, 2023, Mario and Luigi Brothership, she did sound design. So she's been active this whole time.
Was that 2023 or 2024? It was
Maybe
recent.
It was 2024. Yeah, it was very recent.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, that's, starting out in 1990. Here we are, 2024. That's pretty good. Yeah, actually only released about 6 months ago. That's pretty cool.
So one thing that's also impressive, not just about her whole career, but really doing this soundtrack is, we saw it like in our last episode, Blades of Steel, that the arcade soundtrack was converted. And with that, a lot of the music, it changed, but it was the same composition as the arcade. And Tasaki took a different approach here. I don't know if it was the management that made the decision, or she just wanted to take it in a different spin. But the arcade soundtrack and the NES soundtrack, the home console soundtrack, are very different. And we have a track here. This is Stage 1 in the Forest from the arcade version of Astyanax. All right, so that was from Stage 1 in the Forest on the arcade version. And I know, Gene, you really don't like this. I thought it was all right.
So I actually...
It is crunchy. It is harsh, but...
I think there's some interesting ideas musically in the soundtrack. It's but the sound design is very, like, the samples are even crunchier than you would expect for the era. And some of the FM patches are a little shrill.
They're like, hey... you got an idea for like bass drum or something like that? Yeah, just slam your microphone on the ground. That'll work. Nah, it's not bad. It's different. Yeah. Again, this is the same thing with Blades of Steel, right, in the arcade. Just because we just talked about it, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That the sounds probably had to be a little more punchy to stand out. You're getting drowned out by so much other stuff that they had to have these really just kind of like in your face grit to keep your ears focused on what you're playing, not somebody else's game. So
tons of voice samples every time you like slash your axe and kill an enemy. It's like, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. So the arcade version was composed by Kiyoshi Yokoyama, And Yokoyama-san is a Japanese composer and sound designer. Started off his career on the arcade game XX Mission at UPL before moving on to Aicom. And there he worked on a handful of titles as composer and sound designer, including Hoops and Amagon for the NES. That's another one I never said out loud. And Astyanax in the arcades. Taken into the Hoops for TurboGrafx, the Cryon Quest for NES, and he worked on the 64th Street, a detective story for arcade, and finally Vice Project Doom for the NES before presumably retiring from the games industry. Nothing after these, and just moved on, enjoying life.
Yeah, I couldn't find any other credits, so that was my assumption. But you never know.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this sound chip. I'm not doing this again.
I mean, working on Amagon would make anybody want to retire, I think. That's a terrible game. It's one of those like trash games. It's just like really cheap. The music is terrible. I mean, sorry, the music is creative. I just don't think he was cut out for writing music for games in the long haul. Like, look, we got Toshiko Tasaki, who's been in it for 35 years, and this guy was like, I'm throwing in the towel after 5. I'm good.
I'm good. Let's get into our next track here. We're going back over the NES.
Yep.
And this is the boss intro and the boss theme. So let's take a listen.
That was the boss intro and boss theme from the game Astyanax on NES, composed by Toshiko Tasaki.
Do we really need to play that intro?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because every time the bosses appear, so like the way it works in the game is the bosses, you know, when you get to the boss stage, it does that classic NES thing where they need the extra room. So it's just like a black background and like this giant monster, usually some kind of, Cronenberg monster.
2 to 3 times your size.
Yeah, of course.
Usually some kind of scales and like some orb popping out of the side of it.
Yeah, like vomiting things at you, which damage you, of course. And then, then the boss music starts as you actually start to like wail on it. It still gives me a little tiny bit of anxiety listening to it now.
It's a cool track. Let's move on to level 2, Redroad Forest. That was level 2 Redroad Forest from Astyanax on the NES.
I often joke that, especially in older games, level 2 is where they stop screwing around. Like, level 1 is, the triumphant upbeat song, and then we're already at, like, weird, almost atonal, random sounding stuff, and it's just a little bit of, like, there's just, like, this ominous character. I love it.
You're in it now.
You're in it now. Redroad is, it's full of, like, rock monsters, and it's sort of,
red.
Yeah. It's very red. Yeah. it's definitely, it continues a trend. There's a lot of tracks that are kind of like this. There's sort of like the first level's tune, which is kind of more that triumphant, and then this kind of more like random style. Sort of, you'll find most of the tracks kind of fall in one of those two camps.
Yeah. Let's talk about the story real quick. We haven't mentioned it, and well, at the top of the show, we had said, the intro is really long. It's really slow. But it gives you the groundwork for the whole story. And, it's a cute, short story. It's got some surprises. And, no spoilers, of course. But tell us about Astyanax.
Sure. I'll only read up to the point where it matters because I don't want to spoil the ending for folks. But Astyanax is a 16-year-old student from Greenview High School who's been having a recurring dream in which a young woman is calling out for his name. One day, on his way to class, Astyanax is suddenly transported to another dimension, where he meets the fairy Cutie and explains that he is in the kingdom of Remlia and has been summoned to rescue its ruler, Princess Rosebud, who's being held captive by the evil wizard Blackhorn. Armed with the legendary axe Bash, Astyanax sets out on a journey to Blackhorn's lair with Cutie in tow in order to rescue Rosebud. Blah, 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 blah. You know how this goes. It's like a classic 80s fantasy movie, basically.
Oh, totally.
This story, I believe, was invented whole cloth, possibly just for the American version. I actually have not played it in Japanese, but it's like American high school student, and now the young kids would say this is an isekai, right? He's transported to another world, and he's a hero, and he needs to, save the princess. But it's a very classic setup for a story. But it has the stakes. They're there. It feels good.
Yeah. I just realized too, he's a 16-year-old boy in high school, and he's daydreaming. That's like how the story sets off, right? He's daydreaming about this princess or this girl he doesn't know, and he has these reoccurring dreams, and it looks like he's dreaming in class. So it was kind of like daydream or whatever. And then, he's walking outside, and then he gets summoned, like you said, to this other dimension. The part that is strange to me, and I know it's just me, but he's a 16-year-old boy, but when you play the game, he's in like full body armor, and he is ripped.
Oh yeah, dude is like
huge.
Yeah, he's wearing like a sailor shirt, like a striped blue and white shirt, and he's got
he is huge.
Yeah, he's yoked, and then
swole.
This has nothing to do with the game itself, but I was curious because I always thought the whole like Lord of King Astyanax, like what the heck is going on with this weird translation? It feels like, but this is actually one of the few times where I feel like the translation was actually reasonably accurate. Like it wasn't just some random collection of words in Japanese or, English or whatever. But Astyanax in Greek legend was the son of the Trojan prince Hector and his wife Andromache. And he was named after the Scamandrius River, whatever. But what's interesting is the sort of the nickname Astyanax means Lord of the City or Ruler of the City. So I can actually see that Lord of King, Lord of City thing. I feel like it's close enough.
They got the idea.
They got the idea. Yeah. So because it's just such a weird. How do you go from Lord of King to Astyanax? I feel like that's close enough for 1989, 1990. A for effort.
Ballpark, it's good enough. Yeah.
A for Astyanax.
This is the level 2 cutscene. Let's take a listen.
That was the level 2 cutscene from the NES version of Astyanax, and these are fairly short, so we're not going to talk about them too long. But basically, in between stages, you have little cutscenes, very Ninja Gaiden-esque, so, a little story is delivered to you. There is no, technically, stage 3, because it uses the same music you heard in the intro, so, we're not going to play that again. So, what did you think of the track, Brian?
It's dreamy.
Yeah. I agree. I love the weird turnaround at the end where it's sort of like there's almost like a couple of misplaced notes. It's like, okay.
Yeah. It's got a few interesting parts in there. But yeah, it's really dreamy, and I think that's kind of the theme of the game, right? He's daydreaming kind of back and forth, and even if we have a little bit of spoilers, I don't think it's the worst, right? Like, this game's quite old.
35 years old. You could spoil it.
and there's, to be honest, like, it's not that deep, man. It's not that deep again. Anyways, he, correct me if I'm wrong, but he rescues the princess at the end, and she's like, why don't you hang out and, stay here and chill with us? And he's like, no, I miss my world. So she sends him back, but she's really grateful. And Cutie, the little angel, fairy, right?
Yeah.
She dies at some point in the game, right?
In the fantasy world, yeah. In like the legend world or whatever.
Right. And you kind of you've developed some kind of relationship with this little fairy, because she's been kind of your narrator and your guide.
Yep.
As, brought you to the world, and, so I guess she dies at some point in the game. I don't remember if it's towards the end, or it's like right at the end, right?
I think so. Yeah. Like last stage or something like that. I don't remember this exactly, but yeah, close enough.
And then, so Astyanax is like, no, I want to go home. So the princess sends him back to his world, and then like he's walking down the street or something at the end, and I actually never made it this far in the game when I was a kid. I actually just had to watch like the ending because I was curious, like, what happens at the end of the story here? So anyways, he's walking in the sunset, and this woman calls out to him, and sure enough, it's Cutie, but she's like a human now.
Yeah. Goes to his high school or something like that. Like kind of, there's like the game ends on a freeze frame of like a chance encounter. Like, what? It's Cutie from the world, but she's real and a human and my age. And then
she like calls out to him and like knows him.
Yeah.
And so he's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Maybe he just had a fever dream the whole time. And he was actually, that was just his girlfriend.
Something like that. Although,
anyways.
I remember when I was like 8 or whatever, when I played this, I definitely had a, Keanu Reeves moment. It was like, whoa. Something like that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I ever beat it. At least I don't remember. But yeah, anyways, we got the cutscene music from stage 3. Let's take a listen.
That was the level 3 cutscene music. Not much to say about this. I seem to remember this one had some moderately bad news being delivered to you. And it's sort of like, oh no, if you don't rescue the princess, then the kingdom will fall, that kind of thing.
Do you want to upgrade your potion or change bash?
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about the weapons, but we'll want a more appropriate bed for that. So we're going to have the next track.
Yeah, this is level 4, Marshy Swamp.
That was the track Marshy Swamp from the game Astyanax. Very Redroad-ish on that one, you know. little dread chords in there. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
A little ugly, but cool.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I don't mean that in a bad way. I think the soundtrack definitely embodies a little bit of ugliness on purpose, because you are in sort of a dark, basically from the beginning to end, you're in a dark and dangerous world where everything is attacking you constantly.
Yeah. We should talk about the gameplay a little bit. The game is fairly straightforward. It's an action platformer. It borrows a lot of games like Legendary Axe, that kind of template. And it was designed by the same guy who worked on both games, Tokuhiro Takemori. You have strength gauge that charges passively when you're not attacking, and you also can get power-ups to increase the total strength in later stages. And it can be more effective to wait for the bar to fully charge to strike rather than striking as fast as possible. And this is true for like the boss battles, because at the end, if you have saved up enough of your power, you can really like, you know, blast those power shots, you know, that shoot in all directions and take them out faster.
I was kind of curious. I'm like, this feels too close to Legendary Axe to be a coincidence, because this style of platformer is not super common, where, you know, like you have like, I don't want to call it like Dark Souls, but you essentially have a stamina meter where every time you swing, it resets. And so it's sometimes in your best interest for like weak monsters to just slash as fast as you can. But sometimes you have like an enemy that fires a lot, and you really just want to like wait till the bar charges, kind of get in there and do like one good slash and try to take them out. Because if you're trying to get up there and do like quick slashes, you may be sitting there and then you start to attack again, and then you fall into a pit. There's a lot of falling into pits in this game if you're not careful.
A lot of falling into pits, because bad guys will like pop out of the floor on the little tiny spot that you have to jump on while you're in midair. I don't know how, like it used to frustrate me so much. You have to memorize some of the levels for sure.
Oh, if you thought Mega Man was bad, you know, like getting knockback damage, this game has like, imagine Castlevania jumps, and then you get knocked backwards the same way. It's awful.
Castlevania jumps, I love it.
When you're doing well, the game is fun, but when you screw up on the same like two jumps in the same stage over and over again, it gets really infuriating.
Yeah, it's definitely a rage quit.
Oh yeah. Game Genie, I think, for the win on this one for me.
Yeah.
So the way it works with the weapons is you start off with the axe. I assume Astyanax axe. That was part of why they named him that. But it is upgradable. So there's like the strength meter that you can get for your stamina, and then there's 3 levels of weapon. There's an axe. Then there is, they call it the Swift Spear, but it looks kind of like a winged sword. It's got like, you know, like notches that kind of go up. I don't know how you describe it, but like little like spokes that come off of it.
It looks like almost like some kind of barbed wire sword.
Yeah, sort of. It's hard to describe because people don't design swords like that because they're very impractical.
This is a lot for them.
And then, of course, you get your like regular sword, which is like the most powerful sword. But what I always forget, because I haven't played it in so long, is there are actually some benefits to having the weaker weapons. They actually take less magic to use. So there's like a magic bar, which, you know, you collect recovery items, and basically they're AoE style things. So they either destroy everybody on the screen or like shoot out a fireball. The middle sword, the wing sword thing, actually is the best magic economy. So if you want to spam that for bosses, that's a great weapon to have. But sometimes it's better in, you know, an enemy level, you know, a level with a lot of enemies, to have that stronger sword. Of course, if you die, you either revert back a level, so going from like level 3 to 2 sword level, or all the way back to 1. I can't remember, but it's that Castlevania, you got to pick up the whip extension kind of thing. So
yeah,
fun, but frustrating.
Yeah, this game is definitely frustrating.
Oh yeah.
But it is fun. It is fun. It's one of those games that you just want to keep going until you can beat it, even though you know you're going to die on the same jump over and over. You just can't put it down until you get that. You got to beat it. Anyways, you talked about the magic meter.
Yeah. You have 3 spells: a bind spell, a blast spell, which shoots fireballs, and bolt, which strikes enemies with lightning. The bind one doesn't seem like it would be useful, but it's fairly cheap to use and can be good as a way to like stop a pretty powerful enemy from attacking. So it's a good way to save up magic for, you know, you getting to the boss and then using your, you know, attack spells on that instead.
There is also a way to level up your weapons once you've completed like a section, like stage 1 or something. QD will ask you if you want to upgrade your magic or your spells or upgrade your weapon. And so you're given the option, like you can either, I think upgrading your magic is almost like a permanent thing, right?
It might be, or it might just be magic recovery, which is still pretty useful in this game.
Yeah, right. So, but with the weapon, you still lose it if you die, right?
Yeah.
Or you at least go back a slot. So, I think the obvious choice is the magic. But hey, you be you.
Yeah, the magic is really, I mean, if you conserve it correctly, it is the way to destroy that really pesky enemy that's standing on the tiny ledge that's preventing you from progressing. It's like, it's kind of broken, so you can't use it that many times, but it is, you got to find that right economy of using the spells and using your, upgraded weapons. The game has 6 stages, each with multiple parts, 2 parts usually. So it's like, 1-1 and 1-2. And then at the end of each stage, you'll either fight a mini boss, usually like 1-1, you'll fight the mini boss, and then 1-2, you'll fight the real boss. It's pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy there.
It's a really basic game.
Oh yeah, of course.
It really is. Anyways, we got more music. We're going to kind of run through these here and we're just about done. So let's play level 4 cutscene and we'll be right back.
That was the level 4 cutscene, and one word: urgency.
Yeah. Even before the cutscenes, we were talking about being kind of like dreamy and stuff, and they were kind of setting up things. But now you know what you're supposed to do. You've been through a few levels, and things are really wrapping up here. You only got 6, so 4, you're more than halfway. You've gotten over the hump level, and so. Yeah, I think it's a cool track, but let's move on to level 5, Telugamn.
I don't know how to pronounce it either.
Telugamn Bridge.
Yeah.
Level 5, Telugamn Bridge. Let's take a listen.
That was level 5, Telugamn Bridge, and it is a tough level. That one has a lot of flying enemies that are very hard. So,
I don't remember it. Maybe I never made it this far.
Yeah, like imagine Ninja Gaiden, the birds, but they're like really tough, like a multiple hits, and they will sort of, actually more like Red Armor from Ghosts and Goblins, kind of like that. They'll sort of like,
oh god,
swoop in and kind of chase after you. They're really, really tough. It is a hard game if you're not cheating. We got 2 more tracks. Yeah, we got and that's it for the NES, and we'll have a few more from the arcade version after that. But this is the level 5 cutscene that plays, between level 5 and level 6. That was the level 5 cutscene, and Blackhorn has had just about enough of you at this point. He's like, all right, let him come.
That's cool. I like this.
No, it's cool. Yeah,
I like this. Yeah.
It is. It's kind of that dreamy, but a little, not, I mean, it's minor and maybe even diminished chords, but it's a little like, it's kind of ambiguous. It's like, is it positive, negative? It's sort of like unclear. It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Anyways. Round 1 cutscene is next track, and we're going to rapid fire these round 6-1, 6-2, and last boss.
Oh, this is all the same track. So this plays at the end of round 1. It plays during round 6. It plays during the last boss. It's kind of like does a lot of duty. But I saved it for the end because this is pretty much the last like non-ending tune in the game.
All right, let's take a listen. That was round 1 cutscene, which also plays during round 6-1, 6-2, and the last boss. So that was the last boss track.
Yeah.
It's funny. I know this track, but I was like, how's the last boss track sound? And yeah, they're all the same. It makes sense.
It just gets reused. Yeah. Level 6 is especially frustrating because it's a maze. So it's kind of like, there's 3 doorways, and if you enter the wrong one, then you kind of not start the entire section over, but like you go back a room and then the enemies respawn. So this track can get a little irritating. I feel like most of the other tracks, I remember when I played it back as a kid many, many years ago, that like most of them didn't really great, but this one just is a little bit, it's too short for how long the stage is, so it gets a little annoying.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, it might have been designed like, your last action battle kind of thing. But then, yeah, as the stage goes, and especially because it's round 6, 1 and 2, that's kind of seems overkill. But hey, it's a good track. It's scary.
It is, yeah. It's got that that sort of like.
I kind of like how they brought it back, though. I mean, they could have used it maybe at just 6-2 or something. But, it's the round 1 cutscene. So it's kind of where things are kicking off. You've just, made your way into this world. You've met, the fairy and getting ready to head out and actually kick some butt. And then, it's come for a full circle. And here you are, at the last boss. And you got this song again. So, yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of, it's like poetry. It rhymes, right? George Lucas. So I wanted to jump back a little bit over to the arcade version. I'm going to give it a little bit of shine. It's not, it wouldn't be fair for us to talk about Astyanax. There's literally 1.5 or 2 games, depending on how you look at it. It's like musically there's two games, but gameplay wise it's two versions of the same game. But let's go back to stage 3 on the lake from the arcade.
That was from stage 3 on the lake from the arcade version of Astyanax. And I thought this track was awesome.
I definitely. So again, going back to what I said,
aside from whatever that scratchy noise was,
it's probably some like snare sample that's just blown out from just being overdriven on the DAC. But
it could be the emulation too.
It could be too. Yeah. But I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was kind of interesting, just in the ways the games differed. So both games, both the versions of Astyanax, are set in a fantasy world populated by mythical creatures from Greek and Arab mythology. You've got your chimeras and your...
That's it. Yeah.
Well, okay. You've got your Medusas. There's like a lot of like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I gotcha.
The arcade game also has 6 stages: a forest, a cave, a lake, a lift, a castle, and the final battle. It's kind of similar. Like if you look at the actual backgrounds, like play the game and see... You can see like, oh, you're over a lake, you're in a forest, whatever. Obviously, the arcade game is on much more powerful hardware, so the colors are much brighter. It's a 2-player game, which is kind of cool. So it's much more kinetic, right? The game moves a lot faster. There's a ton more enemies on the screen. It's a lot more just like mashing and just like trying to kill enemies as fast as possible, versus being a little bit more deliberate in the NES game. I thought this was kind of interesting. I'm going to read the story for the arcade version. I don't know. This is, I think, translated. I don't know where it comes from, but it says, a long time ago, an ugly battle was being waged every day as the world was ruled by demons. The people trembled with fear, with nobody to stand up for them, until one day a brave young man received a divine revelation from God and was granted the mythical fire axe. His name is Roche. Giving the people courage again, Roche embarks on a journey to the castle of Algerin in order to defeat the demon overlord Argos and restore peace to the world. So it's even more generic than the story we had for the NES Astyanax, and a little bit more Greek, I guess it sounds like. Maybe, I don't know what Algerin is supposed to be, maybe some vaguely Middle Eastern.
Astyanax in this whole thing?
Couldn't tell you. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. It's just like the bare minimum you need to get somebody in front of an arcade machine to slash at dudes, lizard men and things like that. So
cool.
Yeah.
This was released on the System 1?
I believe so. Yeah, the Mega System 1.
Yeah, and it uses a combination of the YM2151 and the Oki M6295 for samples. Not doing it a whole lot of justice for the soundtrack. But
no, the 2151 can sound pretty amazing. This is not really showcasing it.
You win some, you lose some. Anyway, so we're going to play the ending track from the arcade?
Yeah, we got 2 endings. We got the ending from the arcade that we're going to play, and then we're going to wrap it up finally with the ending from the NES version, which is more, that's where you see Cutie as a human being, also an age-appropriate girl, a high school girl or something like that. But let's play the arcade ending first, and then we'll come back and wrap up the show. That was the arcade ending from The Astyanax, composed by Kiyoshi Yokoyama. And I actually really like this track.
I thought it was good.
Yeah.
I don't really care for the percussion. I feel like the drums, when they're doing that kind of like roll down, it sounds...
It's kind of a problem throughout the entire soundtrack, which is why I didn't... There's a lot more tracks in this game, a good like dozen or so.
Sure, but the melody is great. It's catchy.
Yeah.
It's pretty jam. I could change up the percussion a little bit, yeah. And then whatever that scratchy sample is, yeah.
Reminds me a little bit of a game you might remember from one of your early episodes called Golden Axe.
Oh.
Yeah, you've done a couple of episodes, literally twice, I think, on the same game. But no, it's it sounds like an arcade game from 1989 to me with that, like the choice of melodies. It's a very 80s style tune, but I could vibe out to this as an ending tune.
Yeah, it's good. Anyways, today we covered Astyanax on the NES. Played a few tracks from the arcade. And yeah, this was fun. This episode's longer than I thought. I thought this was going to be like 20-minute episode.
No. Yeah, no, I wanted to give some credit to Toshiko Tasaki and on her work, and on congratulations on 35 years in the game industry.
Yeah. If you want to know more about the show, you can find us online at pixelatedaudio.com for the show notes and track lists. Join our Discord. A lot of fun happening there all the time. I've been really, really digging Valley Bell's streams. He's been streaming MIDI content sometimes every Friday, sometimes, for Friday here in the US. Sometimes, he has to skip a few weeks, but very appreciated. Super fun to listen to that stuff and just kind of jam while you work. So yeah, join the server. If you're new to the podcast, check out some of our past episodes. We just did an episode that kind of similar to the soundtrack. It's called Golden Axe, episode 1. And then we did Blades of Steel, which was our last episode, which was a lot of fun. 2 NES soundtracks back to back.
Yeah, we got another, let's see. Is this a Jaleco game? Oh, yes. I had to look back in our archives to see if we'd covered some of the Jaleco games. 185 plus Alpha, which is a really great little shmup.
That's right.
Really short, very wonderful soundtrack. Definitely worth a listen.
Is that the only Jaleco game we've covered?
We also did F1 Super Battle, which was a very...
Oh, right. That was one of our mini episodes.
T-Square, liberal, copied, kind of inspired soundtrack. It was fun. There was another short one, too. But yeah, this is the longest episode on Jaleco we've done.
Yeah, and Jaleco has some good games, don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Bases Loaded was like one of my favorite games as a kid, and that was Jaleco.
They're not turning in A+ work. They're turning in like solid B, B minus maybe work. They're decent.
Yeah. Anyways, tell us about this next track.
Sure. So, as we've mentioned multiple times, we've spoiled this game for anybody that really wanted to see it. But when you see your friend and confidant in the real world, Cutie, this is the song that plays, and it just sort of plays forever. So you have to turn off the system. It just says like the end ? And then this tune plays. It's funny. Yeah. So take a listen to the ending track, and we hope you enjoy the show, and we'll be back in a little while for the next one.